All right, let's try this again. So, we are going to talk now about narrative design. Before we even start, just to say that this topic in itself, it's its own huge topic, which should be its own course, to be honest. But I will try to really get to the most important elements during this particular lesson. And bear in mind, once again, that this is all for the very beginning, like stage zero of your getting to know, or basically getting to know what even narrative design in games is. So, very much, you know, full bottom line. And if you do want to know anything more advanced and so on, please put it in the as a comment or a question in our form so that we can discuss next time, especially on Monday, as I am more than happy to continue this discussion throughout the course, of course, not just at the next session. All right. So, narrative design. First thing, what it is. So, quite often it is being seen as, of course, the story of the experience that we provide to the player. Now, I just want to very, like, this sort of clarify that narrative design is not writing per se. So that doesn't mean even that in the team you might have even many narrative designers, but they're handling the narrative design, which I will explain soon what it actually refers to. Which doesn't mean that these are the people who are actually writing the content for the games. So that's the writers. So they are writing the content based on the narrative design. Now, in many teams, it can happen that narrative designer is also a writer, or you can have even that the game designer is a narrative designer and a writer, especially in the solo dev. Like, they do everything. So pretty much, basically, I just want to clarify that game narrative is not automatically game writing. So basically, when it comes to game narrative design in comparison to traditional storytelling, is of course the act of or the interactivity part of the games as a medium, which of course we can, and we will see soon, there is different types of uh, basically ways how we can structure the narrative, linear, branching, and so on, modular design, and so forth. But mainly what narrative design does is that when you have a game design as a whole, the narrative designer should then basically figure out where, in which capacity, in which ways, the story, the big, especially key, some, let's say, key elements of the narrative itself should be given to the player, and then how are any smaller pieces being then given, or could it be that, especially in the branching narrative, which we will talk separately about, when you are branching things and when you are merging back to the main line or whatever you are structuring, however you are structuring, we are making sure that, again, everything makes sense for the player. So it doesn't feel that no matter what branches happen, that even when they merge at the very end or at any point, that it feels like, well, it didn't really matter what I did this and that differently, because this is how we, especially through narrative design and different kind of gameplay experiences, we are enabling players to replay. So there is a high replayability value in the narrative-driven games, even in my opinion, linear storytelling, because in the big productions where there are also linear storytelling, I mean AAA games, especially older ones, not necessarily newer ones, because there is this whole modular design that I will be touching upon a little bit later. The thing is that even in this bigger kind of like story, there is the main arc, there is the main storyline you are following, but there are so many things that maybe you have missed at the first play, or maybe there are some things that you want to explore deeper if you got another chance, or because you did something further and you couldn't go back anymore, because that's usually common for the linear and straightforward game design. That's sort of like, if you miss something, then it's missed, so you can't really go back, unlike in the open world games where you can bounce around and do all sorts of things. So for that purpose, the replayability value is really high, especially when it comes to stories. And stories, how we present narrative in games, especially through interactivity. Text is one thing that first thing comes to your mind, and I'm certain about it. Like narrative design, oh, it's a story as a walls of text. No, not at all. Actually, a lot of things we want to fully immerse into the world of the game that we're building. So basically, environmental storytelling, characters themselves, like everything on the character. When you think about from the way how character is designed to what assets they might have, what assets they are using, how overall it is all giving the backstory also, maybe to what culture they belong to, what maybe tribes they belong to, what is their story. And every element there which is represented with the character is not just, oh, for the looking cool. They actually have a purpose in the lore. And that's how we do majority of the interactive storytelling, that it happens within the game. Now, of course, for the it's sort of like story-wise dialogues and everything else. So when it comes to the text as a content, that something is being written in various ways, from logs to report, whatever it is. Again, from the game that as you are discovering, you are getting these sorted somewhere in inbox, in the some sort of notes, or inventory, or anything else that comes from the kind of like, depends what game you are, of course, creating. And the main thing is that usually we don't give a big amount of text to the player on the actual screen during the gameplay, unless again it's really story is one of the main mechanics of the game. So basically in visual novels, of course, we have a text, but it's still being very carefully decided how these dialogue boxes are, how much content is at the time giving to a player. Disco Elysium was particularly successful in creating their own, let's say, new approach to how much text is being given, for example, to the player. They used literally Twitter at the time, when Twitter was still, okayish platform. They used the aspect of Twitter, of how much nowadays user, or just generally public, can take text at the time. So basically, they were always trying to have the amount of text that is being given, and plus being, especially in Disco Elysium style, where the text is scrolling kind of upwards, you can still see what was the previous thing, and then what is now, and then the choices, what possibly you could do. And of course later, when the Disco Elysium started making money and being, like this, so basically developers also improved it further, including the really incredibly done voiceovers for every character, especially because there's a lot of dialogues, there is a lot of thinking and matching and whatnot you need to do within the game. So check Disco Elysium, especially there are plenty of talks by the developers, how they created this whole system, because again, a lot of text, it's not a problem. Like, players actually do like to read, so that's not a problem, but how you give the text, same thing with everything else what we spoke so far, is like the amounts you give at the time, that it's not overwhelming, but it's also relevant and not being boring at any point. So that kind of like balancing will take a bit extra attention when you are working on this sort of, let's say, text heavy games, as a text, as a medium. So that also applies, of course, to visual novels or any other, let's say, interactive fiction as such. Now, in other games where we are more kind of like action driven or whatever, so we are usually having the text being available in inventory, logbook, journal, whatever it is. Like, again, whatever it is that holds the record. So basically what we are doing then is that we are giving the player opportunity to, on their terms, take their time and go through, let's say, logbook, and check what it all means, and in which kind of like what, explore further on their own and really read. So there is this sort of like, it's there, you can explore it, but again, you're not forced to do it. So it's enough if some small description was enough, especially if it's clear enough that the player knows exactly what, let's say, item is for, or what sort of note it is. But for those who do want to know deeper and get into the, like deeper into the lore, then they can do it. So we are always leaving that open opportunity for the players to explore. Now, the problem, of course, with text is that there is plenty of issues when it comes to, of course, localization, because if you have a lot of text and that is now supposed to be translated to whichever language, it's not just about the costs of the translations, but it's also how now this text in that other language, because words are completely different. Let's not even go to the whole, right to left and left to right kind of like how people in different cultures and different languages write. Let's not even go there. Let's just even think about just our, let's say, European languages. Like if you say something in English and it takes, let's say, like this, 3 rows, in some certain language this can be 5, or sometimes it can be 1 row, or whatever it is, even no matter that you're not touching any fonts, sizes, or any other setting. So that also means that this whole, how much you're giving to the player at the time, also needs to be rebalanced in this case. So all of that gives extra tasks on your plate to make it work for this sort of really immersive experience, because the whole point of translating something and localizing, first of all, you never translate just for the sake of translation. The localization happens with all the contextual matching, and same like with the book translations. So it's not just translating the words, you are translating the whole, basically the message of the author, the art form, now in the other language, so the others can also enjoy it in the same way as it would be the original content how it is intended to be experienced. So basically these are the things to keep in mind when thinking about text. And so yeah, narrative designer, their job is based on the big design to really figure out what is the story, how everything will make sense based on the what is happening throughout the game, across every single level, across every single action, whatever is happening, and then deciding when and what certain big key elements would be given to a player, or maybe what would be some extra things for some other achievements for those who do want to go further, because we are always tracking these things and figuring out what type of players would like to have more of which kind of content. And that's something that later you can, of course, go deeper with the testing. Testing is something that, of course, we have to do from day zero. But the problem with narrative-driven games being tested, and I can tell you that from experience because our studio just does that, narrative-driven games, again, mostly RPGs. So, like giving the narrative, especially narrative during the development, that it can go to whichever direction, it's very hard to also take certain feedback, because we know that it's not like, but it helps with the direction. It helps to see what works, what doesn't work, maybe with the amount of text, with the approaches, and again, what the different players might want to know more about. But it's still have in mind that you can't really in the earlier stages do much with testing that. You can maybe brainstorm more with players what kind of things they would like to see and so forth, but it will be, this will, like testing actual narrative and things, come slightly further down the line from the initial let's say pre-production concepting stage. But at least in that stage you can still test to see, hey, does this spark some interest in, and in what way, to the players. So of course that is a must. But when I'm talking here about seeing what actually works for different player types, then that's something that you have to do slightly further down the line. And then yeah, so then when the narrative designer arranges all how it should be happening, in which part, in what way would be given, would it be, and also that's the thing, like narrative designer will say, will this be, what is the text, actual content that will be given then to writers to write, what is the let's say cutscenes and things that will be animated in a sense of maybe some, you know, like literal video editing and whatnot, what will be part of the actual world where you are giving the story through action, what is the part where, so basically all of these different elements of the narrative, that's all narrative design. So it's not just the text, it's what happens and how it happens, in which way and in what time, to the player for the experience we want them, or we encourage them to pursue. But of course player will do their own stuff, so therefore we need to also make sure that there is room for, especially in the modern design, that there is room for doing their own choices, their own ways, how they want to play. All right, now I little bit mentioned about this kind of like linear, branching, and emergent. So I'll just very fast go through this. So linear, pretty much as the name says. So you are following the plot, you're following the main line of the story, but also gameplay, because these are intervened in a sense that gameplay itself can be the part of story that happens in player's head. So again, it doesn't have to be, it can be just that we basically trigger certain emotions which become own stories from the player's perspective to tell further to other players, for example. Then, and that of course we see in The Last of Us, like this, there's so many games. But then we have of course branching narratives. Branching narratives, there's so many so many excellent examples to use, but here I have put Witcher and Life is Strange, especially Life is Strange 1. It's such a beautifully done narrative in the way that how they have done, especially this branching and then how things merge back. So we will talk about that very soon. So these are just like, so basically what it means in the branching is that at certain point of the gameplay you will have choices. Now these choices can be within the game world or within the text or within whatever it is, but the point is that you will have this kind of branches that will give now new open up new things for the player to explore in that specific path that this branch might be giving. But then eventually these all merge at some point to the main line of the narrative. And the thing usually what happens there is that even that, so how we do to make a player feel that their choices matter, even that it's illusion of choice, is that we track, and the game will show and have everything and refer even to the things that that player did throughout that particular choice. So dialogues, things collected, stuff done, stuff not done, like this. Or so basically all of that will be commented in some way and referred to whenever basically throughout the rest of the game. And that's how we are giving this unique gameplay experiences, even that it's all basically hard-coded. And then we have emergent games, like games where we are pretty much allowing player to feel full freedom, but again we know that there is no such a thing as full freedom, but very specific rules of the world itself. Like Minecraft is an excellent example of how much the world's rule, how it works and so on. Like these are the restrictions, but also opportunities through these restrictions allow the player to really create their own, again in their head, in their own experience, something unique, some own story, whatever it is. And of course multiplayer allows completely next level of experiences. So the point is that in emerging games it's more like allowing player to really just go for it, but again it's not full freedom, because the world itself has its restrictions and its rules and its structure, and what can player do and in what way and where and how and when. So it's a very carefully designed, all of these kind of elements that come there. But the point is that player feels that it's absolute, this sort of full freedom. And that's why these are the games and the narratives of Emergence. Then, really, really important part here is the player. I have already said this in the very last lesson, if you remember, that why we play games. First of all, every game is some sort of, and I don't mean this in a bad way, it's more like escape from reality, meaning that you are not part of this world, you are experiencing something else. And that can be literally even the stuff from the real world, let's say farming simulator or whatever other type of simulator, or it can be, being space explorer or whatever else it is. So basically, games will allow us to do something else in their own way and in their own world, which is not necessarily part of this world. And even if it does refer to it, it has nothing to do really with the real world, because again, this is the digital version of whatever referring to the real world. Therefore, player, everything happens, player is the creator of that fantasy. Everything happens in player's head. That's something that you really need to always remember. And once again, why should player care and what should player do? These are the most two important questions that you need to ask yourself. And when it comes to story now, this is even like the stuff you can do can be very simple and cheap, and I'll give some examples very soon. And by what I mean cheap, meaning that it doesn't take much of the effort, especially from the design perspective, to create something that would be really player-centric. But it's important to know where you put it and what way that the player, again, feels that their gameplay matters, that their gameplay is unique. And again, it's not just about us as players, like, or we actually as developers creating something for others, like what we would like them to do. More importantly, players are the ones, as they are experiencing, they are also creating memories, very, very vivid memories, because these memories are part of their actions, their actual behavior in this digital world. So there is a huge psychological impact we actually have on our players as designers. So please remember that. So what we want to do is to allow player to explore the world in the possibly several ways, but even if you force the player to do something for the sake of experience itself that you want them to experience. So for example, The Last of Us 1 and 2 actually have quite different approaches in this, and deliberately. So again, second one, it's way less choices what you as a player can actually do, because the designer really wanted you to go and explore this particular, let's say, psychological state of the protagonist. And many other games have that as well. But again, it's up to you how you want to balance these things. So there's nothing wrong to basically force the player to do this if that is the part of your art form that you want to give. But in practice, we usually want to have options also, if nothing else, for accessibility reasons or other kind of well-being reasons. So bear that in mind. And here I just also added more of kind of like, I'm sure, because BioShock, everyone should be at least aware of that game. It has had a really, really big impact, not just at the time, even to this day, on the kind of how everything has been designed and structured. And for example, in this case, when we are talking about player agency, for example, moral choices are a really big part in that particular game. And now, when we're talking about creating and how to do stuff with the narrative elements, first of all, characters or representation of the player in the world. So usually character of sorts, and it doesn't mean that it would be humanoid. It can be like Thomas was alone, little shapes. So it's about really creating compelling, emotionally engaging representation of the player, and then the ones that player interacts with. And this is basically what will be the main part of creating these character arcs in the game. And this is not just for protagonist but for others, and also how everything, again, depending how deep you go and how complex the in-game relationships might be. But this is one thing, if nothing else, make very engaging representation player of the player in the game. Then, besides, so character first, because again, this is something that player will first identify with. So that's the first thing. Then we have world building. So where this player is, what they are supposed to do. So this is where we are really going deep into the whole environmental storytelling, and this is where you will want to, trust me, you will want to remove a bunch of text into the actual environment and the character development and so on. So basically that, and you don't have to, just like let the player experience on their own, and you don't need to write stuff. So don't repeat information that it's already on the screen. And so environmental storytelling will be your best friend when it comes to this stuff, because here you can put so much, lore, history, interactivity within the environment. So player, again, even if you don't give any description, by just some glyphs and stuff, you can literally connect things. You can connect things through visual elements that can be, specific for specific biome, for specific, again, culture of the some tribe that might be in there, or some other group of whatever NPCs you have, or even where your protagonist belongs to, and so forth. And then, of course, plot and pacing. Now, figuring out the balancing, the kind of like when the pace, like how much information and how much content, especially important, breakthrough moments, these key elements of the story, when are you giving them, in what amount, and also how everything else from the gameplay flow, either both takes the player to that point, but at the same time connects these from the other aspects of the game. So basically that everything is cohesive, that everything has that at the end it could be this sort of wow moment when player actually connects the dots. Because again, we want players to do the biggest impact in narrative design is allowing player to do own discovery, because also learning as an individual, as people, we learn the best through discovering and doing stuff on our own. And we can guide, but we want also to allow them to discover things on their own. So this is where we want to, have that kind of like, and that everything that happens in the game is part of that kind of bigger picture and bigger and giving like a fractal effect in a sense. And then different kind of techniques. So I already mentioned some cutscenes and some different kind of in-game narrative. Again, you can have cinematics, but you can also have everything happening through interaction within the environment. You could have, of course, different kind of dialogue systems. Journey is quite a good example, where you don't have comprehensive language nor anything else, and yet the communication happens between different players that might meet in the world, and also with the world itself, because it's all symbolic and very, very well designed. But this is also where the dialogues, it's not just about, discussions. These are also part of this whole branching system, which I'll touch upon more very soon when I will talk about the modular game design. But this is where it's really important in the dialogue systems, especially branching dialogue system, that we have that basically system remembers what kind of, so this is where in-game relationships are being created, in the sense that the system recognizes what and how has been, like how protagonist has been interacting with different characters, what they have done, did they complete some quest or did they not, did they kind of disappoint some other character, or did they actually complete things, is there something that they have done that might cause harm to, might be not the direct character but someone they care about. And so it can be really layered, it can be really, really complex. But I don't mean complex here as a bad thing. On contrary, you do want to create this sort of deep relationships that, again, we as humans will understand, especially as we from the real world, but also would appreciate through some this sort of like games that gaming experience that allows these sort of deeper connections. And Mass Effect, of course, is one of the really good examples for that. And then, of course, we have non-linear storytelling. So this is where it's more kind of like fragmented and player-driven story, where you can kind of like so it's more. This is also kind of simpler version of the modular game design, which we will get back very very soon about. But basically, you can allow player to go through, and so open world, for example, so people can bounce back and forth between these different things as its own little things. But then again, there usually is this this main arc that one is following and working upon. So I mean, as a game progression kind of like goal. And just very briefly to touch upon the visual storytelling. So I mentioned about and I'm not going into depth with this, because this is actually something we do more in depth at Digital Art and Interactive Experiences course. But here I just wanted to give this example that when we are talking about environmental storytelling, we use the basic principles, which are, like millennia old, of the way how visual communication for humans work, and mostly how our brains work. It's all based on our literally how brain as a not just as a way of thinking, but also on this sort of subconscious level of how we recognize things and shape. So basically, shape and colors will have a lot of and how we use them in different compositions. So lighting and staging is really important. And here is just one example that's how we use this from, so basically none of this is a new thing. The same principles are being used for, since the dawn of humanity, of kind of like how we use representation, visual representation, for communicating with the viewer, user, player in this case. And basically why I am using this particular scene is that while the paintings or any kind of 2D visual representation, static one especially, we have multiple angles, multiple things that we say on one image, which is usually an allegory. So basically some text or some sort of story is being now represented in one image, and that story can have many parts, like literally beginning and the end. But now in games, especially because we do play, even if they are 3D like this or whatever, so basically even if we play in the 3D world, we still interact through the 2D screens. And again, majority, let's not go to VR side yet. So the thing here is that whenever you are turning the camera or whatever you are exploring, you are still seeing that sort of like window, just as it would be a painting. And that means that at any point, so think about it as old school film, that you would have these sort of sequences as you are moving, camera around, that at every point, every single point of the camera, meaning what camera shows, is that it will have information to the player, where I am, what I'm doing, what I'm supposed to do next. So these visual cues of elements and how everything is composed, telling us exactly where are we supposed to go next, what are we supposed to do next, and like just what else is happening around. Is there danger around? Isn't this and that? So basically, environmental storytelling works in that way, or the visual storytelling. And I mentioned, of course, that sort of like how characters, representation is also story of its own. So here we have Eloy in her traditional, her, let's say, tribes outfit with other elements there. But then, of course, you can change the outfits in the game, and then you can kind of merge with other tribes and do all sorts of stuff, or just be cool if you want to. So it can be customization also in that way. It doesn't always have to be something that comes with a game progression per se. It can be just getting that sort of very personalized experience for the player, for allowing them to do the representation of themselves through the character in that particular world. So that's all I'm gonna say. Not gonna bore you with that. Now, Branching narrative. So I mentioned diamond method in the very beginning. So basically, this is where, if you think about the diamond of like again any shape, like, it doesn't matter. But basically, the diamond in a way that you can start from somewhere, like from the same spot, and there it could have multiple, not just two, but it can be multiple branches that one can do. And then later, it doesn't have to that everything leads again to one. It can have that some may merge somewhere else, and so you can have, it kind of resembles a diamond shape, even that it can be very complex one, or then again very simple thing. So that's why it's mostly called diamond method. And basically, this is where you are making sure that the certain impactful key elements of the story and the gameplay are being clearly, like, that nobody passes through them or loses them or misses them. So that's where things have to go to a specific places where, which are crucial for the overall experience. And this is where we usually prioritize illusion of choice. So this sort of like making sure that this is where we are, because everything that player chooses we can track, and therefore that stays in the narrative side for, dialogues, for whatever else comes, even items they might possess and so forth. And we can do a lot even with the environment. So environment can change based on their action and so forth. So these are the sort of cheap ways how we can keep, but everything is hard coded actually from the start. And then one thing that I would highly recommend, especially because branching can be a huge headache because you will see, if you haven't done any branching narrative design so far, very soon it can become absolutely unmanageable mess of choices and things, and then where you put it back and how you then track them back and so on. So instead, what we use is variables. So basically, this is where we're tracking different choices and these variables. So we're not branching, we're actually collecting through certain choices, like we're collecting specific unique choices that player has made, and then from there, basically this is the start of creating this modular game design, and especially procedural storytelling in games, which is something that is standard nowadays. But I'm just like, again, we are starting from the scratch. So this is something that we can, of course, discuss more, but this is really big discipline within the narrative design when it comes to modular and procedural storytelling. So I can't unfortunately go in much depth there, but I'm happy to, of course, discuss in the class together. But what I can do, what I can little bit share is, of course, the whole how this design approach is. So basically, you are deciding which events are triggered under what conditions, because there could be different conditions, or it could be even combinations of conditions that could trigger something. And this is where we are kind of like, this is where the modular design is so powerful, because what this means is that whatever content you're creating, it can be adjusted with the rest of it. So basically, no matter what player does, it will still make sense on the long run. And this allows also that the players can complete objectives and the main parts of the gameplay in multiple ways. So it's not just this sort of one way, or even if it's linear, by the way. So it doesn't have to be that now it's somehow that it can be, this can be done even in the linear one, which is beautiful thing. So you can give this sort of more replayability value on the linear design. Because this is what will allow you to reduce the massive branching and different kind of feature creeps and a bunch of other stuff that can happen in the process. So trust me, this will be savior for your headache quite many times. And one more thing as a tip is that try to break the story into choice cluster stuff. So kind of, again, modules in a way, rather than having huge flow chart and with the all other. So try to think it as something that can be modularly, like puzzles, puzzle pieces being reconstructed according to what is needed and where is needed. And this is also allowing us then to reuse the actual game assets and also recontextualize. This is quite a word. So contextually, we can reuse different kind of things from the game world, from the assets we have, from the characters, from the story, and so on. So this is why modular design is such a kind of like standard practice nowadays, especially for narrative driven games. And above everything else, the player. So once again, it's all about the player. This is where like everything is all about the player. So basically, once you know what players should do, so once we know the mechanics, we know what should be happening, we know what kind of like all that is clear. Now we need to give a meaning to these actions. So this is why should player be doing the things they do in the way they're doing it, and why should they keep going? Like what is that sort of main goal that really inspires them or challenges them or whatever it is that triggers the interest to the player to experience. And then again, how does the player gameplay affect the game experience? So if there is this sort of like that we are allowing, so higher illusion of choice is something that we always, have, aim towards, but figuring out what does that mean? How does that work? And then of course, one thing is that at the end, like endings, especially in the whole kind of, if you have multiple endings, because it doesn't have to be that branching narrative means automatically multiple endings. You can have the same ending, like in Mass Effect. So it doesn't have to be that it is, but if you do, still, every single ending has to be cohesive and meaningful for the way how the gameplay was. So basically, you really want to have well-developed ending, something that would really be, bringing all things together, and it doesn't have to be complex. Again, less is more. This is something to really practice here, and this is where you want to also have, merge things back to in whatever elements now makes most sense. But again, you want to make this sort of closure to whatever it is. And again, it can be open ending, but some sort of closure to kind of explain at least where, what, how, what is the current state. And again, you can totally leave some open parts of it for potential sequel or potential DLCs or whatever you are planning to do afterwards. But it has to be meaningful. It has to be something that they really, really enjoy. And makes it all worth it. That's the thing. We want to make sure that the players feel that all of this so far was worth it. And as a last thing, less is more, always. So please focus on what actually matters. This is why game design pillars and visual design pillars and also narrative design pillars will be your best friend to keep this sort of sanity check. And that means that you always should be focusing on the impact. So player, what impact does this make? What kind of emotional connections we can create? And again, that doesn't mean a lot. We want to make sure that these that we do pick, that they actually do what they're supposed to be doing. So we want quality over quantity. And that's something, so don't just explode things for the sake of, oh, let's show more. If it doesn't, like, it won't fix it if things are generally broken in the narrative. So make sure that absolutely everything makes sense, and this sort of the reason why should someone care. And with that said, again, I know there was quite many new terms here. I said this is quite a complex discipline of its own, but these are the good starting points to consider. And of course, always there, even after this course, happy to chit chat on this, especially for those who are interested more in the interactive storytelling and narrative design. So see you all on Monday and have an amazing weekend. Bye.